Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the UK economy because the budget figures for December have now been released and they show that the budget deficit has soared to extraordinarily high levels as a result of increased debt and also increased debt costs. And I sort of feel like the UK at the moment is a bit like one of your friends that gets divorced. And then they find a new partner, and that new partner encourages them to start spending. They go a bit wild, they spend more than they're earning, they get themselves into a lot of debt, and then they start talking about getting back with their old partner. And that's sort of a little bit what's happening in the UK, because we had Brexit, which the vote was actually taken in 2016. However, the full divorce didn't happen until the start of 2020. We then had the COVID-19 pandemic that threw everything up in the air and suspended all of the discussions and the trade deals that the UK was hoping to put in place with everybody. And now we've had a change of government. We've got a new partnership in place in the UK, and that change of government has gone about spending more than it's earning and getting itself into a right old pickle. So let's start off talking about budgeting. Everybody that's ever put together a budget knows you need to work out how much money you've got, and then you can work out how much you're going to spend. And if you're spending more than you've got, then you're going to have to find some money from somewhere else, usually through borrowing. This chart, which is provided by the Office of National Statistics in the UK, shows the total monthly public sector receipts for the United Kingdom. And what this shows is that in December 24, the UK government received £94.4 billion in tax and social security receipts, which was an increase of around 3.2% against the figure received for 2023, and an increase of almost 11% against the receipts for December 2022. Well, so far so good. The UK had £94.4 billion to spend in December, which was more than they had last year and a lot more than they had in the previous year. However, unfortunately, as this chart from the Office of National Statistics shows, the UK government spent £112.2 billion in December, which represented an increase of £13 billion or 13.1% against the amount spent in December 2023. So you don't have to be a genius or an expert mathematician to work out that if you're spending more than you're earning, it's going to increase your debt. And this chart, which is also provided by the ONS, shows the public sector net borrowing per month dating back to December 22. And what this shows is that in December 24, as a result of spending more than it received, the UK government had to increase its net borrowing by £17.8 billion, which represents an increase of £10.1 billion or 131% against the amount that the UK government borrowed in December 23. And just to put that into perspective, the £17.8 billion borrowed was the third highest ever in December. The only two instances where we saw higher levels of borrowing in the month were in 2020, which was in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and 2009, which was after the global financial crisis. And if you're looking at what's going on now, you wouldn't say that currently you would expect it to be the third highest month in history. It tells you that there are serious problems happening in the UK right now, because the other 2 months have an excuse. The COVID-19 pandemic and the global financial crisis were global events that the UK had no control over. However, the UK can't currently claim that what's happening is down to external factors. This is down to the decisions being made by the current government. This chart shows the monthly ratio for public sector debt as a percentage of GDP. And you can see that in December 24, the ratio was 97.2%, which was higher than the ratio recorded in both December 23 and December 22. And if we look at this chart, which shows the net debt to GDP ratio dating back to 1901, you can see that the current ratio is one of the highest levels that's been seen since the 1960s in the UK. And this tells us that there are problems because the UK has been running up large amounts of debt. And unfortunately, GDP hasn't been increasing at anywhere near the level needed to offset that increase in debt. And that means that the UK is now looking at high gearing levels. It's got a lot of debt that it needs to service. Now, if you've been following the channel, you'll be fully aware that the UK government debt costs have risen significantly over the past 4 months as a result of a bond sell-off. This has been a global phenomenon. Lots of fund managers have been selling bonds, and when they sell bonds, that means that there's an excess supply over demand, and therefore price goes down and the yield goes up. And the yield on a bond is basically the cost to a government of issuing new bonds. And this chart, which shows the yield on UK 2-year, 10-year and 30-year bonds, really highlights that point. If we start off by looking at the yields in the middle of September, around 4 months ago, and this was the time when the UK government was putting together its budget plan, and the budget was released on the 30th of October, you can see that the yield on 2-year and 10-year bonds at that point was sitting at around 3.8%, and the yield on 30-year bonds was at 4.35%. However, over the past 4 months, there's been a significant increase in bond yields, and currently UK 2-year gilts are paying 4.3%, 10-year gilts are paying 4.6%, and 30-year gilts are paying 5.2%. And this chart shows the amount of monthly interest paid by the UK government dating back to December 22. And what this shows is that in December 24, the UK government had to pay £8.3 billion in interest, which represented an increase of £3.8 billion or 84% against the amount paid in December 23. And if we quickly jump back to this chart, you can see that in January there was a real spike in gilt yields. So that means that the interest figure for January is likely to be significantly more than it was for December. And this is coming at a time when the amount of debt is also increasing. This chart shows the monthly cumulative budget deficit for the UK in the first 9 months of this tax year. And the tax year in the UK runs through to the end of March. The scale on the right-hand side of this chart is shown in billions of pounds and goes from 0 at the bottom to 140 billion at the top. And we've got 3 different pieces of data here. The pink bars show the forecast levels put together by the Office of Budget Responsibility for this tax year. The black bars show the actual levels, and the yellow line shows the figures for last year. And what this data shows is that in the 9 months to December 24, the UK has run up a budget deficit of £129.9 billion, which is £4 billion or 3.2% higher than the OBR forecast for this year, and £8.8 billion or 7.3% higher than the budget deficit for last year. Now, as you can see from the shape of the yellow line, the budget deficit is forecast to drop in January because that's the month when the UK receives a large amount of tax revenue. Lots of people have to submit their year-end tax returns and pay their tax in that month. So there probably will be a reduction in the net deficit in January. However, interestingly, the year-end forecast put together by the OBR at the start of this year is that the net deficit will be £127.5 billion by the end of March, and that figure is actually £2.4 billion less than the current net deficit. However, given all of the data that we've just looked at, that figure looks highly ambitious. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's going on with debt in the UK right now is really important, because we've got a combination of factors, all of which are negative for the UK economy. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that GDP has ground to a halt in the UK. The last quarterly data that was published showed that it flatlined. There was 0% growth. And there are now concerns that the UK is seriously going to undershoot its original forecasts, and it possibly could even go into recession within the first 6 months of 2025. So things aren't going well in terms of the growth of the economy. So the budget needs to be balanced by taking in enough tax to pay for all of the spending. But what we've seen in today's video is that the latest data for December 24 shows that the budget deficit is actually increasing. And in December, it was the 3rd highest in UK history. The only 2 times that it's been higher were the global financial crisis and the COVID pandemic. And you can sort of understand why the UK would have a really large budget deficit in those times. But currently, there is no global phenomenon going on. We can't blame what's happening in the rest of the world on what's happening in the UK right now. This is down to poor budgeting and poor management. And as I said earlier in today's video, We all have to budget, we all have a limited amount of cash, and you have to live within your means. And if you don't live within your means, if you're constantly spending more than you're earning, then that means that you're going to get into debt. And that's what the UK has done, and that's what is currently doing. And the problem with that is that the debt burden is getting higher, and it's getting disproportionately higher because the cost of UK debt has spiralled over the past 4 months as a result of the bond sell-off, which has pushed up yields, which means that the UK government is now borrowing at higher rates. So that means that it's spending more on interest at a time when it's got less revenue, and it's also spending on lots of different things that it came up with as part of the original budget back in October. Now, the UK government has said that it will stick within its fiscal rules. It won't spend more than it earns. Well, currently, that's not happening. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not the government does stick to that mantra, or if it changes its mind and decides to cut its spending plans. And if it does, then the UK will be facing a period of austerity at a time when countries like the USA are going through a boom. So this isn't a global thing. I keep saying it, but I think that's the point I really wanted to bring through today's video. This is down to mismanagement of the finances and the budget by the UK government. And until it gets its house in order and reduces either spending or increases the revenue by increasing taxes, which would be a very unpopular move, then this situation is likely to continue, and the year-end position, the March year-end position for the UK government, is likely to be significantly worse than originally forecast by the OBR. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.
Not figure you for the jealousy.
Oh, I'm not.
Sabrina.
Talk to Prudence. Flirt with Prudence. Have him flirt with all the weird sisters. Or with the entire academy. Which you do, by the way. Witches and warlocks alike. You're an equal opportunity flirt. And that's fine, Nick. But I'm going home. Oh, and sorry, but I don't think I can be your magician's assistant. Being arm candy? It's not really my style.